Hey guys, I'm Cecilia Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, and welcome to my review of 1917. And before I can begin my review, if you end up enjoying it, then please consider joining my Patreon. That'll be the second link in the description below. Any donations are desperately needed. Alright, before and second addendum is that as I was recording or trying to figure out uh, OBS, the lighting on it decided to shit the bed. So if you're wondering if the lighting looks terrible on my end, that is because something on OBS decided to change the lighting options. I've been trying to figure it out. And to the best of my ability, I cannot figure it out. So if anyone has any suggestions on that, I can't use my phone. My phone cannot record for reviews as lengthy as mine tend to be. I am running out of options, guys. Please, at anything. I'm begging for help here, guys. I don't know what else to do at this point in time. Anyway, back to 1917. This is indeed a war movie that takes place in, well, 1917. We mainly follow two men, or at least for a little bit. Spoiler alert. We follow Agent Blake and Agent Schofield, who I'll just call Scott for simplicity's sake. Blake is sent out on a mission to, with a note saying to his men down the line that they are walking into a trap and that they need to halt their attack on their enemy. So they move along the trenches, and we follow them along pretty closely as they move along these trenches. And they motivate Blake by telling him that his brother is somewhere out there, deep in the lines of their movement. So they move out, and the two of them argue about whether they should wait until more time passes or just go ahead and advance. And Blake, being one of the two who wants to advance, and Scott being the one who wants to stay behind and wait it out a little bit. So they argue a little bit about what to do, and they eventually head out. So they the two of them climb out of a trench as they are sent out. They move past heavy wiring, and from there we pretty much just follow these two as they kind of march along this empty battlefield that has taken place. They are snaking along. They see these planes that are constantly sort of flying about in the air, and they move along this watering hole, and they move to where they assumed where the front line of the enemy would be. They see that the trench is empty, and that the doors and the little cabin areas that they had are all empty as well. Unfortunately, a tripwire causes an explosion to go off, so it was a trap that they sent to, if more people had come in there, they probably would have gotten buried alive. So Blake helps Scott out get buried, and one of the two, I think Blake's wondering, or suggesting that Scott should probably head back as things are getting a little bit dicey out there. So he fires his flare and moves along. And as the two are continuing to travel, Blake tells a bit of a war story that he has come across, and they see more planes as they are traveling. And Scott starts to share about how he doesn't have a family to go back to, that they didn't want him or something along those lines. And Blake, as they're sort of skimming about passing these like flowers. He's like talking about different types of flowers and how he knows a lot about them. They soon come across a house where they do a quick sweep of it. They see the two planes I'm going to assume that they saw before, but now there is a third plane, and there's a gunfight in the air, or a dogfight, as I think it's referred to as. But one of the planes gets hit and ends up crashing near the two of them. They pull the man out that is in the craft, and it's very clear that he is one of their enemies. But they tend to him anyway, or they attempt to. Scott goes to get some water, and in that time frame, Blake is the one who is stabbed. So Scott shoots the man down, and Blake slowly dies from the stab wound, and they take real good care to let that moment sink in. But just as things are looking bleak, two men happen to arrive on the scene because other people are like moving up because of the flare, obviously. I think that was their cue to move up, so that's why they came so quickly. Anyway, Scott is told by the new commander to essentially go with them. So they move up with the line that is now moved up thanks to the flare, and he gets into this transport where he's still sulking about Blake, who has died, and he's left with these other men who are like sharing their stories and mocking their generals or whatever, until their vehicle gets stuck. So, desperate as Scott is, he begins to try to push it with some of the men. He desperately pleads for the remaining men to help out, and they manage to get it out, but it doesn't help for too long, as they only are able to travel a little bit further until they come across a bridge that has been taken out. So he passes along the bridge, and he starts to get fired upon as the men are leaving. He fires back and gets a hit in. However, he clumsily decides to enter in and check in, and the two men fire at each other, and it's really hard to tell. I'm assuming he got shot in the helmet. Scott did, but it knocked him back regardless. Anyway, so he stumbles outside into this war zone that is building up, because he's moving in on that location. He sees this burning building, and soon he gets chased by one of the men, and he manages to flee into one of the buildings that's like hidden with this little plaque. So he meets a woman that is pleading to, in French I believe, to not have them harmed. She is with a baby as well. The baby is not hers, but she's looking after it at this point in time. Scott, earlier on in the movie, had picked up some of the milk from one of the cows that was left over. He put it in his little thing. Also, conveniently, there was a baby, so he gives the baby the milk. So, as he's, like, kind of just chilling there for a bit, he shares a little poem with the baby. And, after the woman tends to his wounds and all that, Scott gears up and heads out. He bumps into a man who yells out, and he chokes that guy out, and another man, comes at him as well, and he starts to flee from this scene that, more and more, two men have now caught on to his movement. So Scott barely manages to dip out of the scenario and dives into the water, and the waterfall carries him down until he's able to catch on to a log and sort of drift along the water. And as he's looking about, seeing these white petals, and is reminiscent of Blake in that moment. Seeing the other many corpses that have been strewn about in the waters, he cries out as he is completely just been through a whole ordeal of craziness. So he heads out now with no gear. He has no gun. Just uh, the the bare minimum of clothing is what he has left to him. Uh, but as he's traveling, as he's sort of shambling about, he hears a voice in the distance and sees a group of men, and he hears one of them is singing. And he's so tired after being drifted in the water, he kind of just, with the whole mental state of it all, he kind of just is like, ugh. He's mumbling incoherently, um, and they move into. He eventually finds out that this is a part of one of the troops that is heading into the front lines. So he heads ahead of all of them, hearing that and knowing that he's getting close, heading into a new trench area, and moves along the battlefield all the way down the line as these men are getting ready to charge in. And the firing begins as things are being flung and people are dying. And he sees that the leader is so far down the line, but he decides to head out, goes over the trenches, like running through. So it's not like he's like running. Well, he kind of stumbles anyway, regardless. And the men are moving in, or some of them are. So as he makes his way down the line to where the door is of like this little like facility, I guess I'll call it, he urges the commander to read the note, and they give him a little bit of a hard time, but they eventually let him pass. And that gets the company to stop the charge. After the fact, he kind of falls back to where the people are being treated. He eventually finds Blake's brother and tells him of Blake's deeds and loss in battle. And after his little moment with Blake's older brother, he heads out, finds a little tree to sit under, takes out a little photo, and just decides to relax for the moment. And that was 1917. And it was a fascinating war movie. Fascinating in the way of its pacing, in that it really builds up to the war scenario of like things are, you get people before the calm of the storm. You see that there have already been battles though beforehand, so this is like somewhere in the middle of this war, presumably, or like near the ending of it, probably actually, if because they suggest at the end of the film was like this is going to be like the final push. They keep referring to that at the end of the movie, so I'm going to assume that this is like nearing the end of the First World War. So yeah, this is an interesting movie considering all the rumors and all the craziness surrounding this whole debacle of like World War III, even though I think we've technically lost count of how many world wars we actually had. I mean, if it's like one side versus another side, I would take that as a world war. So I think I would actually think we were at World War 7 or 8 by now, realistically speaking, if, if people were actually honest about just keeping things simplistic. But I know that's not how it works, unfortunately. Anyway, getting back to this movie, I do like that there was a little bit of downtime in this movie. I do think having the singing before the calm of the storm is it's a little odd. As someone who's reenacted in the Civil War myself, usually you do that in the encampment, and then there's a long marching period before that, and there might be some actual song as you're marching, maybe, depending on the scenario. Most likely, if you're in for the long trek, you're probably singing a song. But if you know you're about to charge into war, I mean, it could happen. I'm not saying it's impossible or that it didn't happen. I'm just saying the scenarios that I'm used to reenacting the Civil War, you know, had a little bit of a different attitude, I guess, or different adjustment of where things would be placed. Um, so yeah, I definitely enjoy how this movie was shot. Uh, I do think that some of the banter could have been a little bit more drawn out. I mean, I think it is pretty solid as is. Not saying it's necessarily bad, but someone who has personal experience in a different type of war reenactment, I guess I do have that sort of lens to look at this from. Um, and that is a fascinating introspective of Civil War versus World War. Um, there are probably different elements to consider. Uh, Environment, terrain, guns, the marching, the tactics. There are probably various different things to consider there. Um, but yeah, I do think that they kept it uh, pretty on key in terms of the environment. Having it look pretty bleak and yet kind of empty and vacant pretty much throughout the movie. You're spending a lot of time in those trenches, and it's sort of carrying you, not doing too many crazy various shots. It's sort of panning along with these men, these two, which eventually becomes one. And the timing of that is a little bit awkward as well. They were trying to help the man, and then as soon as the guy goes to get the water, which wasn't necessary, Blake gets stabbed. It's a little bit off on the timing. Um, it's definitely hard to say how to, if that is an element that you're going for, how to present that in a way that is that would feel a little bit more natural. That's definitely something that's pretty challenging, all things considered. Uh, but I do think that they cover other elements. I saw one other review of this before, and I thought about how the men sort of just come out as soon, after the whole stabbing incident. And I thought to myself, well, they did technically shoot as I mentioned, a flare. So there is that element of they did consider some of that going in, and just covering the rest of the bases probably would have cemented those little other awkward moments as well. Like how Scott conveniently had milk for a baby, things like that. Just little other conveniences that are just sort of there. Um, I do, out of the two characters, I do feel like Scott, out of the two of them, he was sort of along for the ride, so I do think that his character was a little bit underplayed by comparison. Um, like he does have his little story about his family, but other than that, I can't really recall him sort of kind of having a moment of his own separate of that, if that makes any sense. Other than that, it's still a pretty solid movie, I would say. I would give it a 7 out of 10. Um, I think just clean up some of the conveniences and have a little bit of banter on both sides. It did seem a little bit uneven. Blake, he did seem like the main character up until the point where he got stabbed. And that is a bit of a miss. I think that's a bad way of doing that. Either you have them banter equally. That way, there's just more emotion. Um, and that way, when one of them falls, you can like, okay, now we're gonna follow this guy, but we already know who this guy is. Instead of saying, we're just kind of following this guy who was kind of just picked out of the scenario, and he had a little bit of a little bit of a story, but that's about it. So those are my thoughts on and my review of 1917. And if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations are desperately needed. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.